In the heart of the Carpathian Mountains, there was a forgotten village called Radumer. Hidden from modern maps, it was a place where legends of ancient evils still whispered through the thick forests and crumbling ruins. Among these, the tale of Vladislaus, the Cruel One, was the most feared. Vladislaus was no ordinary vampire. His reign of terror stretched back centuries, his name spoken only in hushed tones, as if uttering it could summon him. Legend said that Vladislaus was once a warrior prince, a man so obsessed with power and immortality that he made a pact with the darkest forces. He was granted eternal life, but at a terrible cost. His soul was stripped from him, leaving only hunger in its place. The vampire's thirst for blood was insatiable, but what truly set him apart was his love for torment. Vladislaus did not merely kill his victims, he broke them, savoring their pain, their fear. His crimson eyes would glow in the dark before he attacked, the only warning his prey would receive. He could smell their terror, taste their despair in the air. He would toy with them, letting them believe they could escape, only to corner them when hope seemed within reach. One cold autumn night, a traveling merchant named Stefan passed through Radumer, unaware of the village's dark history. He was a grizzled man, hardened by years of wandering treacherous roads, but even he could not shake the feeling of unease as he made his way through the dense fog that clung to the forest like a living thing. The locals had tried to warn him, telling tales of the beasts that stalked these lands, but Stefan dismissed their fears as superstitions. As the evening deepened, Stefan's horse grew restless, refusing to move further into the mist. Cursing under his breath, he decided to camp for the night. He built a small fire, but the light seemed feeble against the oppressive darkness that pressed in from all sides. The silence was unnatural, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch in the distance. Then, just as Stefan began to drift into uneasy sleep, he heard a low, guttural growl. His eyes shot open, heart pounding. He grabbed his knife, but the air around him had grown unnervingly still. The fire flickered, and suddenly, across the clearing, he saw two glowing red eyes. Vladislaus emerged from the shadows, tall and menacing, his pale skin almost translucent in the firelight. His fangs glistened, sharp as razors. Stefan tried to flee, but it was too late. The vampire moved with inhuman speed, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "Do you think you could wander into my domain without consequence?" Vladislaus hissed, his voice cold and ancient. Stefan gasped for air, his legs kicking wildly, but Vladislaus only tightened his grip, savoring the terror that flooded his victim's eyes. In a swift, cruel motion, Vladislaus sank his fangs into Stefan's neck, drawing out the man's life essence. Stefan's body convulsed as the blood drained from him, his skin turning ashen. But even as the life ebbed from his body, Vladislaus did not grant him mercy. He kept Stefan on the edge of death, ensuring that every moment was filled with agony, feeding not just on his blood but on his suffering. When Vladislaus was finally done, Stefan's lifeless body was cast aside like a discarded doll. The vampire stood over his corpse, licking the remaining blood from his lips with a twisted smile. His hunger was momentarily sated, but his thirst for cruelty never ended. Yet, as he turned to vanish into the night, a strange sensation washed over him. For the first time in centuries, Vladislaus felt watched. It was as if something darker than himself lurked within the shadows of Radumer, something older, waiting for him to slip. He frowned, scanning the tree line. But there was nothing, just the stillness of the forest. Or so he thought. Deep within the ancient woods, an unseen force stirred. It had been waiting, patiently, for Vladislaus to grow complacent. And now, with the blood of his latest victim still fresh on his hands, the time was near. But Vladislaus did not know this. He retreated into the dark, his thoughts already turning to his next victim, unaware that soon his cruel reign would face a terrifying reckoning far worse than anything he had ever inflicted. The night was far from over. The game had only just begun. Days passed after the death of Stefan, and the village of Radumer grew quieter, the oppressive atmosphere suffocating its few remaining inhabitants. They knew Vladislaus would not be satisfied for long. His appetite for suffering was as relentless as his need for blood. They whispered of his cruelty, but they also spoke of a presence, something stirring deep in the woods, beyond even the vampire's control. Vladislaus had returned to his castle, a decaying fortress perched atop a jagged cliff, overlooking the forsaken village. The structure was as ancient and cursed as its master, with ivy-choked walls and turrets that seemed to scrape the very sky. His lair was filled with relics of his long, violent history, rusting weapons, shattered shields, and the bones of countless victims. But on this night, even within the cold stone walls of his stronghold, Vladislaus felt uneasy. He had fed recently, yet there was no peace in the quiet. The shadows within the castle seemed to shift unnaturally, as if watching him. His crimson eyes darted to every flicker of darkness, his heightened senses reaching out to detect any presence. Nothing was there, but the feeling persisted. He could not shake the impression that something or someone was stalking him. As the moon reached its zenith, Vladislaus retired to his grand chamber, an opulent room filled with rich velvet curtains, ancient tapestries, and a bed draped with blood-red silks. He paced the room, his thoughts consumed by an unfamiliar restlessness. His thirst was no longer for blood, but for understanding the source of this new disturbance. Then, there was a sound. Faint at first, barely perceptible, like a soft, melodic humming carried on the wind. It was coming from deep within the castle. Vladislaus froze. The sound was unfamiliar, a low haunting tune that seemed to grow louder the more he listened. It echoed through the halls, bouncing off the stone walls like a ghostly whisper. His lips curled into a snarl, fangs bared. He had never tolerated intruders. Whoever or whatever had entered his domain would pay the price. Following the sound, Vladislaus descended into the lower levels of the castle, his movements swift and silent. He passed through long-forgotten corridors, past crumbling statues and halls that had not seen light in centuries. The humming grew louder as he approached the ancient dungeons, an area he had not entered in years. The heavy iron doors creaked open as he pushed through. The dungeon was as he remembered it, cold, damp, and filled with the stench of decay. Chains hung from the walls, and old bones littered the floor, but something was different. In the farthest corner of the room, the stone wall that had once been solid now appeared cracked, as if something had recently forced its way through. Vladislaus approached cautiously. He knelt before the crack, peering through it. Beyond, he saw a narrow tunnel that stretched far into the earth, its darkness seemingly endless. The humming was louder now, almost hypnotic. It called to him, beckoning him deeper into the unknown. Against his better judgment, Vladislaus slipped through the crack and entered the tunnel. It was narrow, the stone walls pressing close on either side. The further he went, the stronger the sense of being watched became. It was no longer paranoia. There was something here, something ancient and powerful, lying in wait. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The air here was thick and cold, and the walls glistened with an otherworldly light. At the center of the cavern was a stone altar, covered in strange, pulsating symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when looked at directly. And then, Vladislaus saw a figure, shrouded in darkness, standing beside the altar. Its form was indistinct, as if made of smoke and shadows, but its presence was undeniable. This was no ordinary creature. It radiated a power that rivaled even his own. The figure spoke, its voice a deep, echoing rasp that reverberated through the cavern. Vladislaus, it said, you have lived long, fed on the misery of countless souls, but the time of reckoning draws near. You are not the only one who hungers. Vladislaus narrowed his eyes, his hand instinctively moving to the dagger at his belt. Who are you? He demanded, his voice cold and commanding. The figure chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down even the vampire's spine. I am the one who has waited in the dark, the one who has watched you feed and grow arrogant. You believe yourself invincible, but there are forces older than you, darker than you, and I have come to claim what is mine. Before Vladislaus could react, the cavern began to tremble. The symbols on the altar flared to life, casting an eerie glow over the chamber. The air grew thick with a foul energy, and Vladislaus felt something grip his chest, something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. The figure stepped closer, its form shifting and solidifying. It was ancient, far older than Vladislaus himself, and its eyes burned with a dark fire. It raised a hand, and Vladislaus was thrown backward by an invisible force, crashing into the stone wall with bone-rattling impact. He tried to rise, but the force held him down. For the first time in his long existence, Vladislaus felt powerless. "You are not the hunter tonight, Vladislaus," the figure hissed, its shadowy form looming over him. "Tonight, you are the prey." And with those words, the shadows in the cavern surged forward, engulfing Vladislaus in a suffocating darkness. He fought against it, his fangs bared, but the shadows tightened their grip, dragging him deeper into the abyss. The villagers of Radomare would never know what became of the cruel vampire who had terrorized them for so long. But whispers spread of strange lights seen near the old castle, of dark figures moving through the woods, and of a new presence, something far worse than Vladislaus stalking the land. And somewhere, in the depths of the earth, Vladislaus's torment was just beginning. The true nightmare had only just begun. Vladislaus struggled in the darkness, his strength slowly waning as the shadows constricted around him like living chains. He had never known such power, not even in the throes of his own bloodlust. The ancient entity, this force of primordial darkness, was beyond his understanding. His mind raced, searching for a way to break free, to reclaim his dominance. But every thought, every plan, was crushed beneath the suffocating weight of the abyss. The cavern's light had dimmed, leaving him in a void so deep that even his vampire senses could not penetrate it. He could no longer feel the walls, nor the ground beneath his feet. The entity's voice echoed in the blackness, mocking him. "You thought yourself eternal, Vladislaus. You thought you could escape the reckoning. But eternity is not what you imagined." The voice was all around him now, twisting through his mind like cold fingers. And then, with a flicker of clarity, Vladislaus realized the truth. This was not just a punishment, not merely a defeat, this was his damnation. Suddenly, a searing pain shot through his chest. He looked down, though he could see nothing, and yet he felt it, his very essence being ripped apart, unraveling like a thread in the fabric of time. The hunger that had driven him for centuries, that endless thirst for blood and suffering, began to turn inward. Vladislaus felt his own craving devour him from the inside out. The entity spoke again, its tone cruel and mocking. "You are the hunter no longer, Vladislaus. Now, you shall know the endless agony of those you tormented. You will hunger eternally, but never again will you feed." As those words sank in, Vladislaus's terror reached its peak. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His throat constricted, his fangs digging into his own flesh, as his body twisted in on itself. The darkness around him closed tighter, becoming a prison not just of shadow but of his own eternal suffering. And then, Vladislaus felt it, a deep, knowing emptiness, a void that had taken root within him. His hunger for blood was still there, an insatiable need, but there would be no relief, no satisfaction. He would forever crave, forever be tormented by the taste of life that would never touch his lips again. He was trapped in his own personal hell, forever starving, forever deprived of the very thing that had defined him for so long. His power, his immortality, had become his curse. For centuries to come, the villagers would speak of the old castle, how strange winds howled through the empty halls, and how, on the darkest nights, one could hear faint screams echoing from beneath the earth. But they would never know the full truth that deep within the caverns, Vladislaus, the once feared and cruel vampire, was now nothing more than a wretched, tormented soul, lost in the void of his own endless hunger. The cruel irony of his fate was complete, and so, the nightmare never ended, only continued, forever twisting in the darkness.